Hi, today we're going to talk about making the writing process more manageable using two different metaphors for writing. Before we get started, I want you to pause the video and make a list of all the steps you think go into making a good paper. There are no bad answers, so just write whatever comes to your mind. Don't overthink it, just spend about a minute or so jotting down everything you have to do if you want to write the best paper you can. When you're done, hit play to continue the video. Ready, set, go! All right, welcome back. I made a list of my own too. We probably have some things that are the same on our list and some things that are different. Here's mine. When I write a good paper, I have to do all of these steps: brainstorming, drafting, revision, editing, proofreading, getting feedback, finding a thesis statement, doing research, putting in the citations, adding descriptions, adding in details, giving examples, making sure it has a good introduction, making sure it has a good conclusion, making sure that it has strong transitions, checking the grammar and punctuation, checking the sentence structure, checking the spelling, avoiding repetition, and making sure the format is correct. Take a look at your list again. You're probably remembering some steps that you left off, and if I look at your list, I'll probably see some things that I forgot too. The main point here is that writing is a lot of work. It's not just one skill, it's lots of skills, and almost no one is great at all of them. So when people say that they're good at writing or bad at writing, I always ask myself what they mean. Which parts are they good at? Which parts are they bad at? Almost everyone struggles with some part of writing, and almost everyone is good at least one part of writing. Making the writing process manageable starts by recognizing that writing requires a lot of different skills and helping you find which ones are your strengths and which ones are going to take more effort. You may have heard about the writing process, and people usually advise that you do writing in stages that look something like this. First, you sit down and brainstorm, then you make an outline, then you do your research. That's all the pre-writing work. After that, you move on to writing, where you draft your paper, add in your citations if you're doing research, and have a full draft finished. Then you give it to someone for feedback, make revisions, proofread, and ta-da! You have a beautiful paper in 3 easy steps. This is called a linear process because it happens in a straight line with one step after the other in the same order every time. We like linear processes because they're easy to follow and they're easy to teach, but that's not how writing works. Okay, maybe it works that way every once in a while, but it's rare. For most writers, even professional writers who write every day, writing is much, much messier than that. Things very rarely stay in a neat, tidy order. Here's a better representation of an actual writer's writing process. Writing is not linear, it's recursive. Recursive processes can start at any point and they loop back on themselves. You might skip some steps and do some steps several times before moving on. You might, for instance, just jump right in and start writing a paper without ever brainstorming. You might then get some feedback on that rough draft you made and use it to do some research before then brainstorming about what you want to add and then getting more feedback before drafting some more. There is no right way to write a paper. There is only the way that works. And most of the ways that work are messy. Ideas are messy. Creating something that doesn't exist is messy. Writing is messy. If you don't remember anything else I tell you today, I want you to remember that. Writing is messy. But just because writing is messy doesn't mean we can't make it a little easier. You've got to find a writing process that works for you, and your writing process is going to change depending on what you're writing, how long it is, how interested you are in it, what kind of writing it is, who the audience is, etc. But what is true no matter what you're writing is this: you should always make before you polish. You should always create a strong draft before you start making corrections and style changes. This not only makes sure you don't waste time correcting sentences you might not even use, but it also helps you focus on what's most important and stop feeling overwhelmed by the task in front of you. Stage 1 is the making phase, where you build your paper. Or if you're going to use the metaphor of baking a cake, it's where you bake your cake. Stage 2 is the polishing stage, where you get it ready for an audience. So in stage 1, you're making, you're gathering your ideas, you're finding a topic, you're making a draft, and you're making a mess. In stage 2, you're polishing, you're fixing your mistakes, you're adjusting your style, and you're finishing it up. You're cleaning up the mess that you made earlier. I mentioned baking a cake a second ago. So I want to say that it can be easy to judge our writing against a finished product and feel like we didn't do it right. If you look at a beautiful book, a beautiful poem, a wonderful essay, and you compare your own rough draft to it, you can say, oh man, I'm never going to be able to make that. Look at mine. It's so much messier. But that's because writing doesn't happen like that. It doesn't just come out all at once finished. It's a process, but you usually only see the product. So instead of seeing all the steps that the professional authors put into making a piece of writing, most of the writing that we encounter in our daily lives is already finished. It's already polished. We read wonderful books and poems. We see carefully edited television shows and movies. We read newspapers and magazine articles and blog posts that have all gone through the entire process. We didn't get to see the mess that the writers made creating those things. We understand that it takes steps to make other things. No one expects to build a house or make a cake without making a mess. That's why I want to use those two metaphors to help us understand writing. Whenever you start to feel overwhelmed by writing, I want you to think back on whichever metaphor is more meaningful to you. Writing is like building a house, or writing is like baking a cake. We're going to talk about both of them throughout this presentation today. Remembering and thinking about those can help you feel more in control of your writing process and help you remember that it's okay to make a mess and that you're going to polish it up later. So, there are 4 steps to the making stage, and the making stage is what has to happen first. We're going to make sure we have a purpose, that we have support, that we have explanation, and that we have organization. I'm going to talk about each one of those 4 things in more detail. A cake begins with a recipe, a house begins with a blueprint, and a paper begins with a purpose. What is it that you want to say? Why are you writing? Are you trying to inform someone, to persuade them, to entertain them? This is also where you figure out what you are writing. Are you writing an essay, a short story, a poem, a play? So you have to figure out, what is it that I'm doing here? What am I creating? Just like the baker has to decide if they're making a cheesecake or a strawberry cake or a vanilla cake, and the house designer has to decide if they're making a 2-story house or a small house or one of those little mini houses or a mansion. You have to decide what you're creating too. One of the most important parts of purpose is the thesis statement. The thesis statement is usually a single sentence that's found somewhere in the introduction of the paper, and it lets the reader know this is what we're trying to do here. You want to make sure that your thesis statement is meaningful and that it's easy for your readers to find. That's a big part of having a clear focus for your paper. When you're baking a cake, you have to gather ingredients, and when you're building a house, you have to gather supplies. When you're writing a paper, you gather support. Support is the details, the examples, the quotes, the paraphrases that you use to illustrate your point and prove your argument. The best support is detailed. So you should check for the following in your paper. You want to make sure that you have sensory details, which are vivid descriptions that tell people what things look like, what they smell like, what they taste like, what they sound like, what they feel like. Those are our 5 senses. You also want specific details, and you want to make sure that you have relevant quotes and data if it's a research paper where you're using stuff that you went and researched from an outside source. Ingredients don't become cakes without the right cooking utensils, and materials don't become a house without the right building tools. Support doesn't become a paper without explanation. So explanation is what ties all of that support together, all of those examples, all of those details, all of those stats and facts from your research. Explanation is what connects them back to your thesis statement and makes your paper all come together. Explanation is audience dependent, which means that the way that you explain is going to be different depending on who your audience is. If you're writing an informative paper for 2nd graders, that's going to look different than if you're writing a persuasive paper for adults. Your explanation changes whenever your audience changes. Houses have to go up in a certain order. You need a foundation before you can build the walls, and then you need walls before you can put on a roof. Cakes get baked in an order. You have to mix the dough before you can put it in the oven, or else it's not going to turn into a cake. Your paper needs an order too. The introduction needs to come first. The paragraphs need to come in a logical order after them. The conclusion needs to come last. So when you're going through organization, you want to think about giving your readers markers as they move through the paper. You want to let them know that they're on the right track and remind them where they're going. So let's stop for a minute and think about those 4 things that we said we're doing for the making stage. We're coming up with a purpose for our paper and figuring out what it is we want to say. We're gathering our materials. Those are the details, the examples, the descriptions, the facts and stats if it's a research paper. We're explaining all of those details so that our audience can understand them, and we're making sure that they're in an order that makes sense. If we do those 4 things, we are going to have a pretty strong paper. Just like if the baker mixes up all the ingredients and cooks it, they're going to have a pretty good cake. If the construction crew gets a bunch of really good materials and puts them together in order, they're going to have a strong house, even if they didn't decorate it very well. Even if the cake is bare and ugly and has bad icing around it, even if the house, they picked all terrible colors for the paint and the curtains are falling down, the house itself is going to be pretty strong. The cake itself is going to be pretty strong. So they need to do those things first before they can move on to polishing and decorating. And it's the same for you and your paper. If you have those 4 things, a purpose, support, explanation, and organization, your paper is going to be in pretty good shape, even if you have words misspelled, even if you don't know where the commas go, even if your sentences are a little clunky, even if it's not polished up. Those 4 things are going to make you have a strong paper that give you the skills you need to move forward into the next stage. So you want to make sure you've done those 4 things first. So if you have that strong paper in front of you, now it is time to move on to that polishing stage. This is where the baker would decide how to decorate the cake, or where the interior designer would come in and decide how to polish up that house before they try to sell it. This is where you're going to come in and decide what you can do to clean your paper up and to make it as presentable as possible for your audience. But remember, you do not do this until you make sure that you have those other 4 things taken care of from the making stage. No baker decorates a cake that hasn't been baked. No interior designer goes into a house that doesn't have a roof on it and starts decorating it. You have to make sure you have all of the pieces in place before you start polishing it up. So what does polishing mean? Polishing means going through and making sure it's in the right format, that it is in the style you want, and that you've done the grammar and mechanics properly. So let's take a closer look at each one of those 3 things. Depending on what you are writing, you're going to make sure that the format matches the expectations of your reader or your teacher if you're writing for a class. This includes things like making sure you use the right size font, making sure you use the right style font, making sure that you double space your lines, that you include your name on the paper, all of those things that the teacher says the paper needs to look like before you turn it in. Usually, if it's for a class, there'll be a checklist that you can use to make sure that you have it in the right order. Formatting also means double checking all your quotes and your citations if you're using any outside sources, and making sure that the citations are in the right format. Style has to do with how your paper flows together. The best way to check your style is to read aloud. You want to hear a variation between long and short sentences, and you want to avoid unnecessary repetition. You want to use vocabulary words that match your audience, so shorter, simpler words for a young audience and more complex, more interesting words for an older audience. You also want to make sure that you don't use a bunch of short, choppy sentences or long, clunky ones. You want your paper to remain interesting and fluid so that your readers have a good time as they're reading it. Finally, mechanics is the catch-all term for the editing we do when the paper must meet language standards. We don't want misspelled words, we don't want typos or punctuation errors or grammar mistakes. We want to make sure that we have a strongly written paper that is going to be clear and easy to read. You definitely want to save mechanics for the very last step. Proofreading can take a long time and it can be frustrating. There's no reason to spend time making a perfect sentence that you might cut completely from your paper when you decide it doesn't fit. Just like you wouldn't hang curtains on a wall you might knock down or decorate a cake before you bake it, you don't need to proofread until your paper is almost finished. Also, just like you have to let a cake cool before you put frosting on it, you need to give yourself some space between writing the paper and editing it. Put it away for a while, take a walk, wait a day, come back to it with fresh eyes, and that will make it a lot easier to edit. So that is my advice for making the writing process more manageable. There is no one process I can give you to say if you do these 3 steps, it will work out every time. But I can tell you that if you work on the making stage before you work on the polishing stage, you will have a much stronger paper. And most importantly, when you're in the making stage, you have to be willing to make a mess. Think about what your what a construction zone looks like when they're building a house. There's sawdust everywhere. There's pieces of boards that aren't going to get used. They're chopping things up. They're putting things that aren't going to stay. You're making a mess. You're testing things out. And that's what you do with your paper. Same thing with baking a cake. There might be flour everywhere. You got to crack eggs. You're going to make a mess in the kitchen that you'll clean up later before you do the final draft. That's the same thing with your paper. You have to be willing to make a mess and then wait to clean it up once you're sure that you have everything where you want it to go.